Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Hersey. Happy Thursday to each of you. And on behalf of the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association, welcome to today's webinar titled Effects of Substance Use on Mental Health. This webinar is being made available through a collaboration between the Florida Department of Children and Families and FATA. Please note that as an attendee, you are in listen-only mode and are only able to view your name. Your webcam and microphone have been disabled. If you have questions, please send them using the chat panel. You can use the chat panel to send any questions you may have as you think of them. We will answer questions as time permits. Our audio is broadcast through the internet to your computer. If you experience poor computer audio at any time during today's presentation, there are a few options to try using the audio connection panel. For computer audio, click the up arrow next to the unmute button, then click the switch audio connection panel. Click disconnect, click the up arrow and switch audio connection again, then click call in using computer and follow the instructions. If you continue to experience poor audio through your computer, try using the I will call in option. The access code and event password are posted in the chat panel. Please note you must be connected to the audio of this presentation and view it on screen to receive a statement of credit. We are unable to verify your attendance if you are not connected to WebEx via your computer or the mobile app. Therefore, phone call only attendees are not eligible for a statement of credit or CEUs. The recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FATA website within 30 business days. To access the recording and PowerPoint, visit www.fata.org, navigate to the Resource Center, and click on Training Library as shown on the screen. FATA produces many webinars and workshops through the support of the Florida Department of Children and Families. To help participants track credits earned through attendance, we host an online community that provides a personalized digital journal where participants can maintain statements of credit for webinars and workshops taken through the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. A statement of credit and CEUs for up to 2 continuing education credits are available for participating in today's webinar. CEUs are available for persons licensed through the Board of Nursing, the Board of Clinical Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapy, Mental Health Counseling, and for persons credentialed through the Florida Certification Board. Completing the evaluation after the webinar is necessary to receive CEUs or to access your statement of credit. Please note that the evaluation will close at the end of the day on Tuesday, May 20th. At the end of today's webinar, you will have 3 opportunities to complete the evaluation: a link posted in the chat, a follow-up email from WebEx, and an automatic web browser pop-up when I end the webinar. To complete the evaluation, you will first need to register or sign in to your account. Please ensure your name and email address match the name and email you use to register with WebEx. Information you provide FATA as part of registering remains confidential. If you are a licensed healthcare practitioner, be sure to include your Florida license number for reporting to CE Broker when you register with our site for the first time. If you are certified with the Florida Certification Board or licensed outside the state of Florida, you do not need to provide your license or certification number when you register with our site. If you need assistance with account registration, login, or accessing the evaluation, fill out a contact form on our website or email training@floridabha.org before May 20th, 2025. Please note that WebEx monitors the arrival and departure times of attendees and provides a report upon completion of the event. We are not permitted to provide a statement of credit if you do not attend the entire webinar, and we are not permitted to provide partial CEUs. Statements of credit will be posted within 30 business days after the evaluation closes in the professional development section of your FATA account. For licensed practitioners, CEUs will be reported to CE Broker within the same time frame. This presentation is intended solely for educational purposes. The views, opinions, and information and content expressed in the presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the state of Florida, the Florida Department of Children and Families, FATA, or the Florida Behavioral Health Association. Attendees should note that sessions are recorded and published in various media. Our presenter today is Kathleen Roberts. Kathleen has more than 15 years of experience in behavioral health at the local, regional, and state levels. In her role at CCA, she works with community coalitions, providers, and partners to assess substance use trends through data collection and analysis, conduct research, partner engagements, capacity building, and community assessments. Ms. Roberts also provides ongoing technical assistance and training and serves as a master trainer for Florida with a substance abuse prevention skills training curriculum supported by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Prior to joining CCA, she worked at the Florida Department of Children and Families Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, serving as the clinical team lead, Florida's National Prevention Network designee, and the State Epidemiology Work Group lead. She received her Master of Science in Criminology from Florida State University and a Master of Science in Criminal Justice from the University of Central Florida. And now I'd like to welcome our presenter, Kathleen Roberts. Kathleen, I will turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll make sure that the slides are showing up on your end and then we'll get started. All right, Robert, if you can let me know if you can see the screen.
I can.
Perfect. All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today. My name is Kathleen Roberts. I'm the CEO for Community Coalition Alliance. I'm here today to talk a little more about the effects of substance use on mental health. I know this is a topic of great concern for our communities, and for many of you working in this space, this is something that we're having constant conversations about because there's always something that we're learning. The research is always ever evolving, bringing new light to understanding what are these struggles and issues and barriers that individuals and communities and families are facing. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to tell you a little bit about who we are, just to give you a sense of who's at the table here today. So the Community Coalition Alliance is a coalition of coalitions. Our mission here is to serve as that collective voice for our community coalitions, as well as our community partners working towards the health and wellness for all Floridians. We bring together our coalitions and partners from various different communities, rural and urban, similar and different, and give us the opportunity to have conversations to address issues, barriers, look at success stories, leverage the work that we're doing, and be able to bring together ideas and opportunities for joint efforts. Our vision is that of communities that work together to provide Floridians a healthy and safe environment in which they can thrive. And I think that's something that all of us can get behind. Through our alliance, we have a number of different roles that we play. The first is being that opportunity to bring all of the different coalitions and community partners together and have that membership alliance for conversation. We also provide some funding and oversight, a lot of training and technical assistance, and do a lot of engagement for new partnerships to expand the network and the reach and be able to leverage a lot of the opportunities that we have in our state. Because as many of you know, we have a much larger problem than we have funding for. So the best way that we can tackle the issues ahead of us is to be working together and leveraging those efforts. We can do a lot more when we all come together. So today we're here to talk a little bit about the impact with substance use and mental health. And by the time we leave here today, our hope is that you're going to take away the following. So our objectives for today are to analyze the role of substance use as coping mechanism and its compounding effects on mental health challenges. Recognize the intergenerational transmission of stress responses and its implications for future generations, and then also apply protective factors and resilience building strategies to mitigate the negative impacts of adverse childhood experiences and promote trauma-informed care practices. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So before we get into too much of some of that conversation, I want to set the stage to give you a perspective of what our communities look like. We're fortunate that over the years, data availability has really evolved to a place where we have access to so much more information than ever before. We are better equipped to understanding what is going on within our communities. We're also at a place where we can dig a little bit deeper to better understand what are those things that are influencing what we're seeing. There isn't usually just one thing, it's multiple things. So being able to look at the data from all these different lenses helps us to understand what are these issues that we're seeing. So with that, let me share a few of these things. I want to bring attention to a report that is done from the, I'm sorry, um, American Mental Health Report. With all of the slides we have here, I've embedded links so you can take you directly to where you can find these different data points and sources and information that's being shared here. For us, it's very important that not only do we bring information to the table, but we also share with you where this information is coming from. So we're going to start first with that national perspective. We'll take it down to our state perspective, and then we'll talk a little bit about individual counties and what that looks like. But this report is fantastic. It brings together a lot of wonderful information for us to understand what's going on across our population. What are the things that we know have an impact and influence on behavior? And how do we understand what that is looking like right now with the different communities that we work with? As you see here, this is their one-pager infographic that they put together that summarizes their larger report, which when you have time, it is very valuable to check out and look into some of those indicators and resources they include in there. From the data that they've pulled, 23% of adults experience a mental illness in the past year, which is a nearly 60 million Americans. So when we talk about this, we know we're using numbers, but it's really important to know that these numbers are people. Um, Take a look at this next point, which is, to me, is very powerful. 5% and 13% of our youth reported experiencing serious thoughts of suicide. That's huge. That means more than 1 in 10 youth in our country are having these thoughts, which to us should be that call to action, ringing the bells of alarm that we have to do more than what we have been doing. 1 in 5 youth had at least one major depressive episode in the past year. Over half, nearly 3 million youth, did not receive treatment. Of those who did receive treatment, only 65% said it helped them. So these points are not here to just focus on the negatives and what's going on, but more to bring and highlight how important this topic really is in our country and why this is so important for us in our state to be talking about, to be looking to bring in additional resources, to also be using this information to guide the work that we're doing, to make sure we're taking an approach that's going to be working well with those that we work with. You see here next, 18% of adults in the US had a substance use disorder in the past year. 77% of them did not receive treatment. 1 in 4 adults with frequent mental health distress could not see a doctor due to the cost, a 2% increase from the last report. Now, these reports are done on an annual basis. So when you go to the site by clicking where it says key findings, you'll be able to see the previous reports that have been done. But this really just brings to attention just how large this issue is and how many individuals are affected by this. In the report, you can also find information on key different measures that they have. This first measure they talked about is the overall ranking for mental health challenges. In the states that they ranked, all of our states here, Florida comes in at 21. It's not the worst, but it's not the greatest either. So these are the various indicators that they looked at to pull this particular indicator here. The next one, this one to me really stood out. Looking at access to care, again, all the states were ranked in order 1 through 50 using these measures for this particular indicator. And we can see Florida is coming in at 40 out of 50. So I share all this information not to be negative, but more of to give us perspective of here are the things that we're dealing with. Here are some of the challenges that we have. Here are the things that we need to think about as we move forward for planning our next steps, because the data that we're gathering should always inform the actions that we take. So now let's take a look at our state and how this looks. The next few slides here provide some really good information about what do our communities look like as a whole. So this slide here gives you the counties with the lowest to the highest risk for severe depression. So these are the number of people that are scoring with severe depression per 100,000. As you can see here, at the lowest rating, we have Sumter County. As you can see, that's the lighter color there, and we circled it with the 13. And then the highest is Lafayette there at 68. and that's individuals per 100,000. So again, here you can take the fuller picture. And as you can see, we have parts of our state that definitely are more on that darker color spectrum here, showing a higher risk for individuals reporting severe depression. This next one is looking at suicide ideation. Interestingly enough, the same counties that we saw on the previous slide with the least to the highest are the same two counties that we see here with the least to the highest when it comes to suicide ideation. And this one is looking at trauma. Trauma is one of those topics we're going to talk a little bit more about here today because it really plays such a major role when we're talking about mental health, when we're talking about substance use, and how we're able to understand where an individual comes from and those experiences that have an influence on some of the issues and struggles. But that's not to say that that is a destined endpoint. That's just to say, if we know these things, then this gives us the opportunity to come in and bring in those protective factors, build up the resiliency, because this is not a trajectory that is going to be definite. But if we know that's the direction, we can put in those safety pieces ahead so that we can make sure that we're leading to that more positive outcome. So again, looking at this, like those previous slides, we have Sumter at the lowest end and Lafayette at the highest end. And so we just thought that this was a very powerful image to kind of show you how all of these different topics that we're talking about impact the communities that we're working with. Another data point that I want to point out is the county health rankings. This is another very fantastic set of data points because it looks at all of the states across the country, but then within each state, we can also look at it by our counties. There are a number of different indicators that go into the healthiness of a county that include not just behavioral health indicators, but also physical health and other access to resources, all those different other indicators. But for the purpose of our conversation here today, I pulled out the ones that relate more to behavioral health to give you an idea of what this looks like. So taking a look at our picture of our states, as you can see from the healthiest ones are those darker green colors to the least healthy or a little bit more of that yellowish green color. And you can see how our different counties look compared to each other. I wanted to pull out a couple of those counties that we saw there that are showing up on the least healthy side. And we're going to hold on to those counties as we go through some of the other data points, because what we'll see is as we identify a couple of these different indicators that are showing concern, we start seeing those same indicators showing concern when we look at other areas. So when you think about these indicators, you're probably wondering, well, how do we know that's poor or fair health? What are we talking about for poor mental health? So there are a number of different data sources that are used to come up with these data points and create this indicator. So I've listed these here, not that everybody's a love of data, but it's really important to know if we're going to be talking about different data points to know where did they come from and what do we mean when we say poor mental health days. So these are indicators that came from the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey. And I again included the link so you can go back and go and take a little bit of a deeper dive into the community you're working with to kind of look and see what are these different indicators and how do these pieces of information help to influence some of the decision-making processes that need to take place on how do we better help our community. So as we go through here, going back to some of those counties that we saw with the more higher risk for some of the mental health and indicators in the previous slides, we put them here so you can see. On our state, you've got it all the way to the right-hand side next to the US, and then taking a look at how these different counties fall with those indicators. Let's start with that poor or fair health. As you can see, the counties that were already in some of those darker colors for all the trauma, the suicide ideation, and just the overall risk, those are the ones that are showing up with a higher percent of poor fair health. They have higher number of poor mental health days. They also are showing up with higher percents of adult smoking, much higher than what we see for our state. You can take, for example, Dixie coming in at 27% of adults are are smokers in the county compared to only 12% indicated for our state. You can see the same thing looking at excessive drinking, and then even more so here for the alcohol impaired driving deaths. So we're trying to show this connection when we talk about mental health. We're also seeing these things showing up for substance use. And when we go through and have these conversations, we need to keep all of those things in mind. So those were the adults, but we are seeing similar patterns in the youth data points, and want to point out a few things. I don't want to spend too much time on all the data because not everybody's a huge fan, but it does help to set the stage in understanding that yes, we're having some of these issues in some of our communities. Here's what it's looking like. So then we can make these decisions of what additional resources, education, services, and supports do we need to bring in for our communities to help them reach to their full potential of health and wellness and be able to have those positive outcomes moving forward. So, taking a look, and to me, this one is such a powerful slide. We're talking about our young people in our state. This is coming from the Florida Youth Substance Abuse Survey that's done on a yearly basis. Every other year, we get it down to the county level, but we always have it at the state level. So, we're going to talk about state level data at this point since we have individuals from all across Florida on this webinar here today. So these are some of the questions that were included in the Florida Youth Substance Abuse Survey that relate more to mental health. The first question was, sometimes I think that life is not worth it. Then at times I think I am no good at all. All in all, I'm inclined to think I am a failure, and in the past year felt depressed or sad most days. Look at the percentage that we have of our young people that are indicating these things. This is how they're feeling in both middle school and high school. And in some places, we're seeing even more by specific groups. So I'm putting up the next one. When we start looking at the difference between males and female students across our states, our female students are reporting much higher percent of these different indicators. When we look at in the past year, felt depressed or sad most days, 1 in 2 girls in our state are reporting this. To me, as a mom of a daughter, this is so alarming, and it makes me want to have more conversations, bring in more of that opportunity to connect to what ways can we support with resources, what ways can we support with skills, what ways can we support to increase resiliency. These are quite significant percentages of young people indicating these things. And so when we talk about mental health in our state, we need to make sure that we're addressing our young people because they're showing up in this. Now, this is also coming from the Florida Youth Substance Abuse Survey using the Florida charts. These are our young people in high school that have indicated that they have experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. And I know many of you on this call here today are very familiar with the ACEs, but for those that are not, we'll go into a little bit more detail of the different questions that come into this. But what the research has shown us is that the more ACEs an individual have, especially once you get to 4 or more, it increases the risk of some of the negative outcomes from the future. And that includes mental health issues, substance use disorder, and a number of other things. And so what we want to do here is talk about and point this out, because this does not mean that is the destination. This means we know we have this in our state, our community is struggling with this. So now let's talk about what can we bring in so we can help counter these different risk factors, so we can help bring in protective factors, so we can build up resilience. So looking here, we can see there many of those counties that we saw with the adults showing some of the higher percent of trauma, suicide ideation. We're also seeing it here with youth reporting similar kinds of things. Now, this is interesting to me. So when we were looking at the data, we saw our young people are reporting those different struggles with feeling bad, feeling depressed, having more bad days than good. But we have resources in our state like the 988 hotline. And when we asked the question, are you likely to reach out to the hotline for help? 56% said not likely. So we see in the data that shows our young people are needing help. We have a resource they're not using. So it makes us think about how else can we make sure that we're getting resources in? Why are they not wanting to call? Is there another way that we can provide this support? And so, one thing I want to share with you is from our coalition, thanks to some of the funding from the opioid settlement dollars, we were able to invest in a behavioral health platform. This platform we launched back in August. And since its launch, when we take a look at the individuals that are using this platform that's intended for mental health and substance use resources, our biggest population that is reaching out for information and resources is our young people. As you can see, oh, sorry, as you can see, our 13 to 17-year olds, this is the largest population using the platform. Next in line is our young adults, the 18 to 24. So for us, this is an indication that there is an issue. They're looking for resources. This is our opportunity to find more ways like this to get those resources out to them. This slide here just shows you the different types of substances. For youth, alcohol tends to always be the number one substance for a number of reasons. It's more accessible, it's more available. It's something that also has become so normalized in most homes that it doesn't have the same kind of reaction from adults as you would from other substances. And so I bring you back to some of those counties that we mentioned for the adults where they started showing up higher for a number of those different indicators. And we see now look at substance use in those counties for young people. And we see the counties are having a much higher percentage of past 30-day use compared to our states. Taking a look at Dixie particularly, where they're coming in at almost 18% past 30-day use of alcohol, almost 13% of binge drinking, 5.4% for cigarette use, 19% for vaping nicotine, 14 vaping marijuana, and 13 for marijuana use in the past 30 days. So when we say there's this relationship between mental health and substance use, these data points should be a very good indication of how that relationship is showing up and what we're seeing reporting for past substance use for our young people. We broke this out also by middle school to high school because we start to see even greater differences in some of those counties compared to our states, with our middle schoolers 12.4% indicating past 30-day use compared to where we are in our states. And you can see that throughout all these other indicators. Same thing for the high schoolers. So we can see those same indicators are showing up. And not to go into more details, but we did put the link to the Florida Substance Abuse Survey so that you can check it out for your particular county of interest, or if you're more interested in our particular region, that information is in there as well. It's a fantastic source of information that helps us understand what's going on in the now, because this is more relevant data to this past year that we saw versus some of the other data points that, reports tend to be 2 years for data from 2 years ago. So those were the data points we wanted to bring in. And so now we want to go into the conversation about adverse childhood experience. For some of you, you probably have been on webinars that have addressed the ACEs because the ACEs have such a big impact on what we see when it comes to behavioral health. We've included here the 10 questions that come in for to talk about what those key experiences have been for from the research that was done. And what we have seen based on the research is that those that indicate at least 4 or more of these indicators here have a higher chance of experiencing some of those negative effects later on if something doesn't come in place and interrupt and interfere. By bringing in more of those protective factors, by bringing in the opportunities to increase resiliency, these are the things that we see show up in a variety of different ways. And understanding this may help understand why, and for some of you that are working with individuals or families, why you might be seeing some of the behaviors or some of the reactions that you see. understanding where they're coming from and the trauma that they bring to the table helps us to then understand how do we better work with these individuals and these families and our communities. So we have included also the links so that you can take a look at that. One of the things that we always encourage is for everybody to take this questionnaire yourself, and not to share it out with anybody, but to also just help you to get perspective of, how does this work and how does this rank for you? How does this show up for you? Because if we're going to be out there working with our communities, we need to know also what are we bringing to the table? What are the things we may want to take a look at and examine? And so these are the things that we definitely want to talk about over the next few slides. Now, this is a phenomenal speaker. If you have not had the opportunity to hear from Nadine, I would highly recommend you watch some of her clips. We've included the link here for how childhood trauma affects health across a lifetime. She goes into some great detail in explaining how that shows up in those different ways, physical forms, the internal struggles, some of the things that come across with health impacts. They're so powerful. She brings to the table her story, her struggles, and how she was able to overcome that, but in such a powerful way and also motivating way. When we talk about ACEs, it's very easy to move to the negatives and how this, these negative things that happen in life then turn into these negative things to happen ahead. But really, because of what we've learned through research, there are so many things that we can interact in between to help counter what we're seeing, help provide those supports, and help to make sure that the individuals have the opportunity to reach their fuller potential, to reach positive outcomes, to be able to be resilient and overcome those obstacles that they've encountered. But unless we understand more about this topic, unless we weave into all of our different organizations to become more trauma informed, it is very hard to make those changes. So that's why we bring these up on these webinars, so that we're increasing the awareness of the impact of this, how powerful ACEs are, and how that shows up when you're working with individuals. So when we look at what we're seeing here for the ACEs, we're seeing things that relate to abuse, we're seeing things that relate to neglect, and we're seeing things that relate back to household dysfunction. So they're categorized into these different groups. And these are the things that we look at when we're trying to understand where somebody's coming from and what they're bringing, what we're going to have to work to unpack and work through to help provide them the supports that they need. So with the ACE course, you saw there were 10 questions, and there's chances are we probably all have maybe one of them or two of them. But what we want to bring to attention is once you start increasing the number of ACEs, the more ACEs that you have, the higher that risk is for experiencing a number of different issues and that challenges that are faced later in adult. So when we talk about ACEs, these are things that occurred before the age of 18. So things that happened in your childhood, but those effects have long lasting effects after that you become an adult. And it starts to show up in things like substance use, mental health, abuse, all these different things. Without intervention, that's where we're seeing the trajectory to be. But the good news is we do have opportunities to intervene. We do know enough from the research to bring in positive childhood experiences. We know enough now to bring in efforts to increase resiliency, bring those skill sets on how to overcome these different challenges. Not that you can erase it, because you can't erase what happened, but you can find ways to help be able to be protected against it, to move forward and flourish. So when we think about what are the ways this shows up, so the way that this shows up is in a couple of different ways. So we've got things that show up behavior wise, lack of physical activity, substance use, from smoking, alcoholism, drug use. Those oftentimes are occurring as a way to cope with some of the trauma experienced in early childhood. Those are the ways that help to kind of put what happened away and erase it. And so that's why you see these things happening. Missed work, some of those struggles, but then you also see the physical and mental health ways that this shows up. Severe obesity. And interesting, bringing that up is the way that the ACEs was really discovered and understood was due to a obesity study that took place where patients were coming in getting support and assistance to lose weight, and they would, yet then they would revert back. And the researcher was trying to better understand, why are we not having the successes if we're putting in some of these things, and slowly but surely uncovering the root cause of a lot of these things were as a result of the ACEs. Those past experiences in early childhood have that influence and impact that lasts way beyond age of 18 and well into your early, middle, and late adulthood. We also see this showing up in other uh, health areas: diabetes, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, STD. So there's so many different ways this can show up in. So when we think about the typical adolescent development, so we're going to go back to our youth, because we saw the data, which very much a concern. We see some of the way that our state rolls out with the different mental health indicators. So let's talk about our young people. What are some of the typical ways that we see changes in that adolescent time when it comes to physical, mental, social, or emotional? And I know we have the chat feature open. Robert, I still can't see the chat. So if you can tell me as people are typing in, what are the kind of those key developmental stages that we see when we talk about youth? Say between 12 and 18. There's a lot of changes that take place during that time.
So I'm seeing peer influence increases,
Absolutely.
independence,
Yes.
self-care changes, hormones,
A lot of
risk-taking, puberty, hormonal changes, puberty, hormones, learning
Excellent.
self-identity.
So a
And
lot of these different things are happening over time, and it's not just one area of the adolescent that is changing. They're changing physically, they're going through a lot of changes mentally, they're going through those changes socially, more access to friends, more freedom, independence, a lot of emotional changes, those hormones coming in. All of these things are taking place at all of this very critical time in that developmental stage. And so when we talk about, again, those ACEs and how this influence, you have a lot of things already changing and already moving around them from where they were as young kids. And now that's why understanding the impact of those ACEs is really important. So when we see some of these things, these are exactly what you all have just mentioned with the changes. They're growing, they're developing, they're starting to think differently, more abstract. They're starting to apply more logic. They're forming their own beliefs. We see that a lot, and as we do a lot of research in understanding different generations, and these newer generations coming in are really coming in with a very strong sense of their own identity and wanting to be independent and wanting to think even more of the importance of the social pieces of life and all of those things. So all of these things are evolving in and happening at this time. And we're also seeing a lot of different changes in emotions. And you see that a lot in that puberty time frame. You see they feel things a little more intensely. And this could be one of the reasons why we do see those indicators showing up pretty high, especially for our females in the Florida Youth Substance Abuse Survey. So we see a lot of these things happening, and a lot of changes socially as well. There's a lot of, like somebody already mentioned, that peer influence and that opportunity to now start seeing and changing and finding their way through all of this. It's really important to understand all those things. But then that's why that resiliency is so important, because those changes are happening and changes are already challenging enough. So think about all of those changes that are happening, and then add in all of those pieces of trauma that are also influencing. It seems like it's almost overwhelming for a young person. But that's why resiliency is so critical. Resiliency is kind of like that protective bubble, the protective paper that you put in when you're trying to pack something that's delicate. Most youth do pass through that adolescent period without a lot of difficulties. Yes, there's challenges. We all have those, a lot of the changes that are happening, but they do move through that. But then when challenges do happen, those are the things that we want to help to make them find their way to be that resilient, to thrive through those things, to mature, to increase their competence. But those things, they are also learned. Resiliency isn't something you're just born with. You have to be taught it. There may be some that have a little bit more of some of that flexibility in the way that they react to things, but most of resiliency is being taught how to have those skill sets, how to think through things, how to not react, but to process and then come across that approach. So when we think about addressing the ACEs, it's how do we help them to navigate and become somebody that has that power to not have that control their direction, because there are opportunities ahead. And so it's really important that this becomes a key component to any kind of program, project, initiative with young people. Resiliency is really critical. And that really goes for adults as well. The more resilient we are, the better it is we can overcome some of the challenges that we have against us. So asking again in the chat, because we don't want to have this where I just talk to the screen and you hear just words, 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 but we want to make it a little more interactive. What are some of the signs and symptoms that you see when it comes to toxic stress or trauma? What are some of those signs? And Robert, if you wouldn't mind sharing what you see in the chat.
We kind of lost Robert, but I will read them. So,
Oh,
anxiety, sadness, isolation, crying, reactive behaviors, anxiety, changes in behavior, lashing out, withdrawal, anger, anxiety, compression, fatigue, withdrawal, substance use, burnout, acting out, self harm, quick to anger, isolation, agitation, depression.
perfect. Yes, that's exactly what we're looking at. So many of you have probably have seen this in the work that you do and the individuals and families that you may work with. When it comes to signs and symptoms, the signs are the things that you're seeing. Those are the things that are showing up, while the symptoms are things that are happening more internally that you may not necessarily know that is there. And we use this as some of those the signs are those warning signs to let us know there may be something there, whether it's physical, emotional, behavioral, different thoughts. Those are the things that are happening, and those are the things that we should be paying attention to. It's very easy to say, oh, that individual just doesn't want to work through the process. They're acting out. They may be acting out, but there's a reason that that acting out is happening, and it's happening because of some of the things that they've experienced. It could be happening as a self-defense mechanism. So understanding that just because we see a certain reaction, we shouldn't dismiss it that they don't want to participate. This is a sign that they may be struggling with some of these things that we're trying to address here. And so when we look at some of those signs and symptoms in the physical arena, we see things that are happening cardiovascular side. So the pounding of the heart, chest pains. We also have respiratory, shortness of breath, breathing too fast, neurological, headaches. A lot of those things kind of stand out for when stress happens. The headaches kind of come in hand with that. You also have of these, muscle aches, pains. So these signs, then these symptoms that you see as a result of trauma and toxic stress have a physical component to them that you can see showing up. And those are things to be paying attention to. It's not just something it's in your head and it stays there. You experience it, now you carry it in your head. It shows up in these other areas. It shows up where it becomes now also a physical concern, and these physical issues that then can also develop into more issues when it comes to different diseases and things like that. You also have, when we think about some of these different physical symptoms and signs of what we're seeing, some of these adjustments that you may be seeing will be changes in their behavior, sleeping more, sleeping less, eating more, eating less, the way that they look. If you're starting to see changes in that, they've gone from one way of looking to another. These are those warning signs that you need to be paying attention to, because that's sometimes the indicator there is something deeper going on. And then we've got our emotions, depressed, mood swings. And this is a topic that's is also very interesting to discuss, because depression doesn't always look the same. Depression doesn't always mean it's somebody that's sad, depressed in a corner. Depression can be somebody that puts on a good front, but there's a lot going on behind what you see. That's why some of these things are the internals that you don't always see from the outside. um, Unrealistic or excessive guilt, anxiety, lack of inhibition, low self esteem. Those are different things to be paying attention to when we talk about this. And then we have some behaviors that stand out: crying spells, withdrawal, um, inability to manage responsibilities, disinterest, loss of motivation, slow movements. All these things to be paying attention to when we talk about what are some of those signs and symptoms that may be an indication that there is some trauma, some toxic stress. And this is where I also see some of those behaviors also push towards the use of substances, because that is that coping mechanism, or then look, some compulsive behavior, avoidance behavior, showing distress, all of those different things. When it comes also to thought process of that constant nagging to your own self, the pessimism, the criticism, difficult making decision, racing thoughts, things that kind of move through faster. And then also that altered sense of self, the tendency to believe others, that they'll be seen in that negative light, lack of insight, the suspiciousness, and of course, thoughts of death and suicide. So, typical stages versus warning signs. So, when we think about young people, and we talked about their developmental stages in that adolescent time frame, you do see a lot of changes. So it's kind of hard to distinguish sometimes. Is this a typical stage, or is this the warning sign? Because we went through and talked about, well, they change, there's mood swings and all that, but then we go and talk about signs and symptoms where some of those things also are showing up. So it's sometimes that fine line to define what is that typical reaction versus what is actually that warning sign. Do we see struggling happening in school setting, social settings, daily activities? Symptoms of the mental illness can often appear similar to that period of development. So it's really digging a little bit deeper and understanding and more, knowing more about that person. And that's why being person centered and trying to dig a little deeper is really important, because there are differences. So when we think about the typical changes that we see versus the warning sign, we want put this into a nice little chart to kind of give you a little bit of a distinction between the two. Withdrawing from family members to spend more time with friends, withdrawing from friends, family, and social activity. So if they're withdrawing from family to spend more time with friends, that's a typical adolescent type of way that they interact. But if they're withdrawing from friends and family and social activities, that's more of the warning sign that you see. Wanting more privacy, that's a normal thing for growing up. Becoming secretive, needing privacy, seems to be hiding something, that's more bordering on the warning sign. And it's not to say that if you see this, that's what that means, that there's something happening. But as as individuals in this arena, to helping our community understand the importance of having conversations around this, asking those questions and making it more of a normal conversation makes it easier to be able to have the distinction between what you think is typical and that warning sign. If we're having these conversations, you're going to be having them all along, and it won't be so awkward when you have to say, well, why are you trying to hide something? We are very open here. We have these conversations. The next one here, moving from childhood likes to teen pursuits. That's very typical. My daughter went one day from playing with Barbies to the next day just wanting makeup. So that by itself is not it. Now, losing interest in favorite activities, but not replacing it with something else and just kind of not having any interest at all, that may be more of that indication that there is a potential warning sign there. Again, conversations are critical. If we make conversations the norm of having these topics discussed in a family setting, in a community setting, it moves away from the stigma. And we were able to identify some of these warning signs well before they become overly critical to the point where more interventions are needed. If we can have these conversations, identify these signs earlier on, we can put in some of those safety nets. We can put in some of the services. We can put in some of the connection to resources. So let's think about risk factors. So we are definitely wanting to talk about how do we do something about what we're seeing. We don't want it to be seen where if you have 4 or more aces, you've got a trajectory to have all these negative things happen. No, we just know it increases at risk. But we know if we know what those risks are, if we know what these factors look like, we can come in and bring in protective factors, and we can come in and build up resiliency. We can derail that road to those negative outcomes to more positive. So let's talk about, what do you define as a risk factor? How do you see what this is? And go ahead and use the chat feature. And Eric, if you wouldn't mind sharing again what you see in the chat.
So there was a question in the chat.
Oh,
Somebody asked, they were born and raised in the Bronx, New York, and came to Florida for retirement. How would they go about getting the ACE questionnaire that speaks to the people of New York State?
so the ACE, great question. So the questionnaire is actually questionnaire for anywhere, whether you're from New York, whether you're from Florida. It was developed through that research study that was actually trying to understand the obesity problem. And so those questions have been refined, and that instrument is the same instrument that's used across the board. And so when we get done with this webinar here today, you'll have access to that. So inside the PowerPoint are the questions from the instrument, and also the link to get more information about the ACEs. Great question. Thank you.
Yep. And to answer the first, some of the things coming in are potential harm to others, smoking, grades falling, low income, domestic violence, household dynamic, self-harm, bullying, distance from close friends and family, mood changes, hygiene, isolation, bullying,
Okay, so
and
we have quite
self-esteem.
an array of different risk factors. Awesome. Thank you so much. And
You're welcome.
what is really important to know about when we talk about risk factors is we are using the term risk factors from a research perspective. So these risk factors that we've learned throughout the years have been identified through research to have that influence on behavior outcome. So it's not just things that we say, oh, well, of course that matters because we know that if you grow up poor, you have these issues. It's not about thinking of things that we think are common sense, because a lot of times people think risk factors like, oh, it's those common sense items that have an impact. But the risk factors that we talk about, they're risk factors because the research has found that they've had an influence on behavior. It does not mean it causes, but it influences. And so the more risk factors that you're facing, the higher the increased chance of some of those negative outcomes. It does not mean it will get the outcome, but it just increases the chances. But the good part is that in addition to risk factors, we do have the protective factors, but understanding what those risk factors are really important. So exposure to the ACEs, absolutely. 4 or more ACEs, that increases your risk to some of those negative outcomes. Ongoing stress and anxiety. We talked about some of those signs and symptoms. Some of those signs and symptoms then turn into some serious medical conditions that have that negative effect. Stressful events, abuse, trauma, learned behavior, chemical imbalance, substance use, seasonal changes. These different things have an influence. It doesn't cause the negative behavior, but it does influence some of the outcomes that you see. Um, Previous episodes of mental illness, medical conditions, side effects, illness that is life threatening, chronic association with pain, brain injury. There's a lot of different things, and we can actually share out some more information about the research supported risk factors that have been identified, because they have them in all different form. What is influential to individuals, what's coming more from that community context, family context, social context, school context, all of these things. And again, a risk factor does not mean negative will happen, it just increases the chance. So let's talk more on the positive side, because we've talked so much about the negatives, the things that go wrong, the issues that are experienced, the things that influence to those negative outcomes. But what about positives? What protective factors do you see working with the individuals or families or communities? What risk factors do you see? And sometimes we forget that protective factors exist because we talk so much about these risk factors, these things that are coming in to derail individuals to go down and have those negative outcomes. But we actually have so many protective factors that exist out there, so many things that can help support, flourish, and encourage growth and development. Eric, do you see any messages coming in?
Yes. So family strength, adult mentors, family support, after school activities, after school programs, athletics, sports, positive adult influences, strong natural supports, engaging in activities to build confidence and self efficiency, open communication with a parent or trusted adult, insight and awareness, substances in the home, the house,
Awesome.
outside support, family, teachers,
Okay.
healthy coping.
Well, those sound great. And I hear a lot of that supportive person in your life. The whether it's teacher, school, mentor, those things are showing up, and those are absolutely great examples of protective factors, because what they bring in is also examples of those healthy practices. They give the example also of how to engage and interact in positive ways. Some of the challenges that we see when, especially thinking about school settings, is kids are coming in from all different backgrounds, from all different experiences, and put into a classroom setting where now they have to all move forward at the same way, the same approach, but they're all coming to the table at different places. And so being able to have those positive adults in your life that can help to show those healthy practices, help to support and encourage and nurture that high self-esteem, to help to teach those good problem solving skills. A lot of these things that we see as protective factors, you're not born with them. You have to see them in example. You have to be taught how to do some of these things. You have to have those pieces in there. So it goes back also to some of our conversation about resiliency. You have to help to build up how to be resilient, what it looks like, how that comes across. We have to have that instruction. And then not only that, but also have the support that allows us to practice those skills that we're learning. You'll see here also avoiding substances. So that's also a protective factor. Consistent routine. Sometimes it's the home, sometimes it's the school or the outside environment. Support and being able to have, we have parental support, familial support, but many of you mentioned here also the other supports from adults in your life, whether it's the mentor, teacher, coach, whoever that may be. Those all have such an influence, and they are the counter to these different risk factors that are showing up. The more we can bring in these protective factors, the better equipped our young people will be to have the opportunity to reach those positive outcomes. And we are seeing with the data that we just showed you here, our young people need this. We need this more now. We've seen at the national level, as well as our state, then trends that we're seeing with increased concerns related to mental health when it comes to young people. So if we know that there are counters, this is our opportunity, our call to action, that we have to find more ways to build this in to the work that we do. Whether we're talking about working with individuals, families, community, we have to find ways to bring in more of these protective factors and make that more of a commonplace, an opportunity. And some of you had said the having after school activities. That is definitely another great opportunity here for protective factors. Um, Having that, because that also brings in some more social support. It also brings in some of that, like you see here, community bonding and being able to feel connected to something beyond just themselves. So let's talk about stress. Stress is something that is not abnormal. Stress, in fact, is something that is normal. We all experience stress in different ways. Stress can be sometimes good. Stress can be sometimes very toxic. So I'm looking to see what are some examples of stress that you can think of.
Work, promotion, tests, financial, new baby, family members, school, relationships, health, death, grief.
Okay. So we brought in a couple of different examples of kinds of stressors that happen in life and the things that influence us. And those stressors affect our emotions. Stress can affect our physical well-being. Stress can have these ways that we react. So we have things that are positive stress. We have things that are tolerable stress. But then we have those things that are more of the toxic stress. And when we talk about those negative effects, it's those toxic stress elements that really have that bigger impact on those negative outcomes. Like I said, stress is not bad. It does happen, and that can be there's beneficial stressors, those positive things that happen, with the way that we react. But learning how to also cope and deal with stress, that is a really important piece because it's stress is not the bad piece, it's the reaction to it and what you're doing about it. But we need to also understand what that looks like. Um, so there are several different risk factors to that toxic stress. Poverty, and I think somebody had already mentioned that in the previous chat, discrimination, housing and food insecurity, these things that happen that are not just like a one and done, they happen and last a longer time frame and time period. It doesn't go away. Abuse is one of those things as well. So a one and done kind of situation, that's not a toxic stress. Toxic stress have to happen over time and frequently. So when we talk about those adverse childhood experiences, they can have lasting effects. And this is why it's so important that we are addressing it here, because it's something that, yes, it's happened in the past, but if we don't put in those safety pieces to help address and overcome, to help bring in protective factors, build up resiliency, bring in supports and resources, help to move past some of those things, we'll start seeing the impact of those ACEs showing up in a variety of different ways, including health, because we'll see that showing up in things like obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, heart disease. This information here, again, we've also put a link so you can go directly to the website from the ACEs so you can see more information about this and see how that affects. We see how it affects in behaviors, and that's how we tie it back in with substance use, because then substance use becomes that coping mechanism on how to overcome those experiences early on in childhood, because we don't have those resiliency skills built in, so something else is being used. Um, Also, you see the impact on the potential of the graduation rates, academic achievement, time lost at work. Those things also are showing up. Um, ACEs have been found to have a great dose response relationship with 40 plus outcomes to date. So, depending on that level of ACEs that you have, you'll start to see that. And you can get more information here on through that link. So when we talk about those ACEs, they're defined as potentially traumatic events that occurred in childhood. We talked about how they show up as abuse, neglect, and the household itself. Um, and we have this information and now in the Florida Youth Substance Abuse Survey, so we'll share that out here in the next couple of slides. But I don't want us to only know that there are these negative things. We also have positive childhood experiences, and those are defined as a childhood experience that stems from safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments, and they have the power to prevent and protect children from traumatic events, toxic stress, or even adverse childhood experiences. So these are things like some of you mentioned involvement in sports, being a part of social clubs, whether it's like the after school club, band, family opportunities, rewards for positive behavior, school opportunities for positive pro-social involvement, school rewards, and all of these data points. And I didn't want to put too much data out here for you, and not everybody's a fan, but we do have that information that we gather for our state, and it's really good information to understand how that's looking. So I just wanted to share out with the adverse childhood experiences that we see from the Florida Youth Substance Abuse Survey. This is for high school students, 9th through 12th grade. This is what it looks like for our state as a whole. As I mentioned, there are 10 questions on the instrument, and so each one of those questions was asked on the survey. And you can see there are some indicators that are showing up more than others. Parents separated by divorce, that's one of them. Incarceration, emotional neglect. So these are what we're seeing our young people in our state responding to, that they've experienced in their life. And so this one here, while I've been trying to use just statewide data, I did want to break it down a little bit so you can see. If we look at our Northeast region, we have 23 counties here. We took a look at the schools of students that experience, the counties where students experience 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. And then we looked to see the reports of alcohol or any other substance use for that area. And you can see kind of that relationship that we do see between experiencing 4 or more childhood experiences and substance use. And so I just thought this was a powerful image here to show that there is that relationship and that we are seeing it. These are the positive childhood experiences, and we do have that information also in the survey, which is great. We do see nearly 38% of students reporting that they're in some kind of school sport, nearly 31% that are in organized sports outside of school, almost 10% reporting that they're in school band, 25% reporting that they're in a club, 11% reporting that they're in a community club. So knowing these things also helps us to kind of see how our young people are involved in the school. And then if we are still seeing higher levels of ACE, then maybe this is our opportunity to see how do we bring in some more of these positive childhood experience opportunities for our youth in our state and across our different counties and in our different communities. These are, again, wanted to show some of the information that's available on there from the Florida Youth Substance Abuse Survey that relate back to those risk and protective factors. And so this is looking at the ACEs in that same survey. As a high level of trauma as indicated the presence of 4 or more ACEs. That was reported by 18.4% of high school students. So we're almost at 1 in 5 reporting that for our state, almost. And then we look at it, what are the most reported ones? That would include divorce, mental illness in the household, and emotional neglect. Now, I just want to also be very clear, just because one of these indicators are showing up, that does not mean one indicator equals negative outcomes. We're not saying just because there's divorce, that's a negative. We're saying when you group multiple indicators together and you're at 4 or more, we do see, based on the research, that chances increase for some of those negative outcomes. But that's why it's more important for us to think about those things that we can do to counter it with the positive approaches, resiliency, protective factors, those things. This was an interesting one that 56% of the surveyed students reported an elevated level of protection for family opportunities for pro-social involvement. So we do have some positives in there. It's not just all negative, but it also is something that helps us as we keep thinking about what else can we do in our communities. Making sure we're incorporating more of these opportunities is really critical. 49% of survey students reported an elevated level of protection for religiosity. And this, we broke it down by middle school and high school underneath it as well, so that you'll be able to have that information. I try to give you as much information as possible so that if you have to go back later, if you're working on a project or you're trying to put together a proposal for a grant, you know where to get some of these data points. And for us, if we're gathering this data, we might as well be using it. Otherwise, there's no point in gathering the data. So we just want to make sure that you all have access to it as well. Within the school domain, protective factors for school rewards for pro-social involvement among middle school was 45%, and then for high school was 57%. So another one. And then this is what it looks like over time. So the ACEs questions have been included in that survey starting in 2020. And so we wanted you to see what this looks like across all those indicators. We still see the same top indicators being those top indicators, regardless of whether it was in 2020 or in 2024, but wanted you to see what this looked like across the board over time. We do see a little bit of changes here and there, but you can see the groupings are still consistent. And this is when we take a look at the number of ACEs. So for those that had no ACEs reported, we're talking about 38%. Then you see moving down to 1, 2, 3, 4, we're at 7%. So it kind of gives you a little bit of perspective, but still, if we're still having that many students, again, that's a percent, and we had many students surveyed. That's still a lot of students, one too many. So wanted to make sure we brought this to your attention. And then this is when we compare those that have fewer to those that have more than 4. And so the majority of our students are showing 4 or less, but we still have 18% here at that statewide level, indicating 4 or more ACEs have been selected. So nearly 1 in 5. So how do we prevent adverse childhood experiences? Well, one of the things is strengthening economic supports for families, promoting social norms to protect against violence and adversity, ensuring a strong start for children and paving the way for them to reach their full potential, teaching skills. I really like honing in on that part because it's really important that we realize and we have those conversations. Is you're not born with all of this knowledge and skill set to manage stress, to have effective communication, to manage emotions. Those are all things that you have to be taught and you have to learn. And so everybody has that potential to learn these different ways to cope, to build in the resiliency components. And if we take that understanding and we start to really weave in opportunities to help teach skill sets to manage stress, to manage those emotions, to increase positive communication skills, to be able to not be reactive to occurrences, but to process and take the steps to figure out what is the best response, we will be able to have a bigger impact on what we're seeing across our communities. None of this is because one person was born one way, one person was born another way. We have to be taught these things. We have to learn these things, which means we in the field have to make sure that we're finding opportunities to weave in those teaching moments throughout at the individual level, group level, community level. So I just really wanted to highlight that one. And being able to connect youth to caring adults and activities. Many of you mentioned this already, the importance of mentors, the importance of being able to have these after school activities, having that role model, because what those caring adults do is that they can role model those positive interactions. They can role model those ways to avoid some of the reactions to stressors and emotions and anger, to role model positive communication skills and how to be able to move past some of those challenges. Um, I go back thinking about some of the things we talked about earlier when we said, yeah, how is this showing up? Well, it's showing up in things like emotional outbursts. It's showing up in ways that you see that anger. Well, part of that is because they haven't learned some of that regulation on how to manage that anger or how to communicate things. And so when we think about why kids get in trouble at school, it tends to be a lot of those types of behaviors. And if you dig deep enough, those behaviors are resulting because of some of the stress that's occurring, this toxic stress occurring in their household or in their wherever else that they're experiencing it. Some of those things are all rooted, so we could have a bigger impact on just general classroom management if we just took that deeper dive to understanding what's happening before your students are getting there. We can help to build in some of those skill sets. And then overall will help the individual, that classroom, the teacher, the school, that community. It all kind of weaves in together like a domino effect. Um, and so being able to have all of those things, there are ways to prevent. Having ACEs, having all of that in the past doesn't always mean you are destined for the negative outcome. We have ways to protect, we have ways to intervene, and we have ways to counter. Um, Strengthening economic supports for families, that's definitely one of the ways that we've seen through the research that is um, helpful for this. And there's a number of different organizations out there that do a lot of training on finances, how to budget, manage all of these things. There's opportunities that some of the community organizations use to do like workshops and opportunities to share out ways to support families. There's a lot of these things happening. And if we have more of those types of opportunities, that really does help a lot. So strengthening that household security, family friendly work policies. I do want to hone in on this one also. So family friendly work policies is really important because when we talk about the toxic stress and things that are coming out and impacting individuals, if we're able to have some family friendly workplace policies where we can help and support our those that are working with us when they have struggles, then we're going to be, from a employment perspective, you're going to be more likely to keep your employee. You're going to be more likely to have a more productive employee. You're going to be more likely to have an employee that's invested in the work that you do. When we don't have those types of policies, and the policy is you show up and I don't want to hear excuses, then you have people that won't show up. You have people that will then can't show up, and then you will not have a very stable workforce. So family friendly work policy seems like such a very, well, why does this matter? Well, it matters on both ends. If a family is struggling, having things that they have to take care of, if there's that flexibility, it allows them to be able to help counter some of those issues happening in the home, but also remain employed and be able to contribute more in the workforce. So there is a lot that can go into this. Ensuring a strong start for children and paving the way for them to reach their full potential. This is so important as well. I think it was last month we did a webinar here with probably many of you. We talked about the importance of trauma-informed care in the early childhood education settings. And the reason for that being so important is the brain, the majority, 90% of it continues developing until about the age of 5. The rest of our prefrontal cortex, that gets more into our mid to late 20s. But that other part, the big chunk of that brain, that is done about the age of 5. That means that early start out of childhood is the time in which you have that opportunity to really help mold and build the opportunities for good communication, thinking, processing, management of stress. One of the key terms that I shared on that webinar was how early education staff, they're brain architects. And they're the brain architects because they're the ones that are having that a long time period during the day with your young one as their brain is finishing that big chunk of that development. And so if we could put in those opportunities that can help them to be able to reach their positive outcomes and full potential, that is definitely where we need to be coming in and being able to share ways to promote, build in resiliency from that age, being able to help teach those skills of communication, because right now they're still young. They don't have all that freedom to go out and self-medicate and be involved with other kinds of, they're much more constrained to being from house to school and then back. So we can do now of building in that opportunity for resiliency, helping them to learn refusal skills, helping them to be able to ex- think through and process and help regulate and navigate through emotions, then we're going to set them up to be a much stronger young person as they move through that adolescent stage that comes with all of these changes that they have anyway. So it's really important. This is that age group that plays such a significant role later on in life. So when we talk about those early opportunities, we have early childhood home visitation programs, looking at the high quality childcare, preschool enrichment with family engagement. These are those opportunities that we have to start building in those skill sets from an early age, where we help them to learn and understand emotions are not bad. We can talk about them. Even anger is not bad. It's the reaction to it. Stress is where we can start to think about how are some positive coping skills that we can teach our young kids, so when stress does occur, how can they regulate, how can they help counter, how can they manage and maneuver, so that those skills then keep building up into they get to the adolescent and then into adulthood. It's really important for all of those things to be playing a role in this. And then we have teaching skills to help parents and youth handle stress, manage emotions, and tackle everyday challenges. Now, just being a parent is stressful enough. I mean, and for those of you that are on the line can absolutely understand that. So if we know the job of parents comes with stress, then we absolutely need opportunities and ways to help build skill sets on how do we handle stress? How do we manage it? Because it's not just the stress of having to make sure that you're caring for another person and making sure that they're doing all the things they need to do in school, but also everything else that you have to balance in life with work, with household, with your own self, and all of those things play a big role in how everything kind of tacks up together. And so in that we look at a couple of things that are really critical, and especially when we talk about the intergenerational issues that we see when it comes to substance use and mental health. You saw with the first few slides that we showed you here on the data points and are looking at the different counties, we have many counties that are showing a very high risk for trauma. They're showing very high risk for having suicide ideation. They're showing very high risk for levels of depression. And those are looking at adults. And if we're seeing that's what you're around, it's very easy to share and communicate that down to children. And then in line comes the issue of this is the example you're seeing, this is what you're exposed to. And then we talk about weaving in all of these others pieces of like the ACEs and how that all plays a role. So then looking here at how can we put a break into this is looking at ways that we can provide opportunities for change, looking at teaching communication and problem solving skills. And this may seem maybe common sense to some, but communication skills is actually a skill set that is learned over time. It's not that easy. You don't just wake up one day and know how to communicate. You don't wake up one day and know how to solve the problems ahead of you. And if you haven't had the experience or the examples from other mentors or other adults in your life, it's very hard to build these up. So finding ways that we can teach this in those parenting classes, finding ways that we can bring this as a way to talk through, and again, bringing the importance of this is a conversation we should be having. It's not one of those taboo topics. We should have conversations on the regular about emotions and health, communication, and how do we move through that. Um, Another piece that has been identified through the research is the importance of teaching out and sharing out safe dating and healthy relationship skills. Those are really critical because as the adults, they're the ones that children will be looking up to. They see those are their examples. So making sure that we have these opportunities to share out what does a healthy relationship look like, so that we don't continue to repeat the cycle. Well, if you have never seen a healthy relationship, you're not going to wake up one day knowing what the healthy relationship is. And you don't learn it overnight. It's things that we have to build in and bring in throughout the time period. And the parenting skills and family relationship approaches. Parenting is a challenge of itself. There's no handbook that we're given the day we have are given a child, have a child, adopt a child, be around a child. We don't have all of the answers on day one. So we have to learn along the way. And the thing, what we see with research is we have learned a lot. There are things that we do today as part of positive parenting that was not really seen, 20 years ago. Our approaches are changing because we're learning from what has been done. We've had opportunities to examine, well, how does this approach work? How does that approach work? Having opportunities that where we actually are talking more. For many of us growing up, talking about mental health was not something you did at the family dinner table. It wasn't something that it was a big part of the family discussion. It was, we don't talk about it. And if anybody struggled, it was just that one person. So we're changing and shifting that approach where we're having these conversations. We're helping to teach young parents to also have conversations, to talk about emotions, to talk about feelings, to talk about it where it's not wrong to talk about how you feel. Because if we did more talking about how we feel and how we felt, we wouldn't see some of these numbers that are showing up in their Florida Youth Survey of our young people saying that they have more bad days than good. 1 in 2 girls in our state in high school have more bad days than good. That is huge. And that should be a challenge to us all, that what we're doing needs to be a little different. We need to start having more conversations. We have to help our parents having those conversations. We have to have ways and opportunities to teach these skills to our young people and also help them to understand that they too have to have these conversations, and it's okay. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be able to find help, seek help, and tell somebody, because we just want to be able to provide the resources, the supports, and all of that information needed. So connecting youth to caring adults and activities. We've talked about several of these areas in the past few slides, but it all brings it back full circle, because what we see with connecting with other adults is, people mentioned this, the mentoring. Being able to have someone role model for you ways to interact, ways to regulate emotion, ways to deal with some of the anger, ways to handle stress, ways to be able to move forward. Um, that is a huge opportunity that can be so very beneficial. So having things like mentoring programs as well as after school programs allow for these types of opportunities to take place. We mentioned that resiliency. You're not born with having all the resiliency in you. These are things that we need to teach. These are things that we need to practice. One session of resiliency is not going to cut it. It is having opportunities for ongoing conversation, ongoing teachings, ongoing opportunities to practice. Because if we're not giving opportunities to practice the skills, it's like not really teaching the skill. Skill learning is part one, skill practice is part two. and then kind of the feedback that comes from it, part three, and then repeat. So having these opportunities is really important, and having ways that you can see those protective factors coming in. We mentioned the protective factors of having opportunities for those different clubs, being involved in positive environments at school, outside of school, whether it's a community one. It doesn't have to be connected to the school. It's just that opportunity to be in another group circle, that you're seeing those positive ways of engagement. You're seeing opportunities to practice resiliency. You're having those positive influences on that youth and individual. And the after schools, to be able to have something to be connected to feel a part of, whether it's a club, whether it's a sport, whether it's music, whatever that may be. And we know that in some places this is easier said than done. Not every community has opportunities to have after school programs, but that's where we look at the providers that are out there that are working in the community centers to to work together to find a way to support these types of opportunities. Do they all have to look the same? No, because every community is going to look different. Your needs are going to be different. What you have available for resources will be different. But knowing that, having that after school opportunity, that connection with other adults that can serve as those role models for you, for how to handle stress, for how to handle communication, how to regulate those emotions, is really critical. And then intervening to lessen the immediate and long-term harms. That early childhood from 0 to 5 is so very important in developments and the opportunities for what's ahead in the future, to be able to reach that potential, to be able to have those positive outcomes in your life, is more important. And once we understand that this is the time frame where your brain is finishing up 90% of its developments, if we know this is what's happening, we can start intervening earlier. We can start putting in these positive practices in every area of the community. That means enhancing primary care. That means having available those victim-centered services, um, treatment to lessen the harms of ACEs, preventing those problems for future involvement in violence, family-centered treatment for substance use disorder. When we take the person family-centered approach, we're able to really work more with what's going on with the individual. Everybody coming to the table comes with a different background. They come with different experiences, and we can't treat every single person the same, because their experiences are different. What they went through is different. What they need, the types of support is going to be different. So we have to remember that that has to be a critical part of what we're doing and how we're doing this. The enhancing primary care is a really a good place for us to kind of start this conversation here too, because in primary care, that's another trusted adult that you see on the regular basis, who can then share out these informations, have some of these screeners in place, be able to better understand, because some of the things that you'll find showing up in health are showing up because of the experience of things like ACEs or other issues in the background. They're showing up with physical ailments. So if we understand where people are coming from, we can better understand why we're seeing what we're seeing, and how can we do a better job in treating that. Like I said, the ACEs original study, it came out of a study on obesity. And it was because they wanted to know, well, why are we not having the success rates? And so they dug deeper. And once you started digging deeper, you started to find these commonalities across those individuals that were not able to stay complete the research project and stay within those positive outcomes. They kept reverting back. So it was interesting, as the more they explored, those similar background pieces are what they found across all of those individuals. And so that's how the study of ACEs evolved, and how now we can use it to better understand behavioral health, and then also be able to better understand how do we bring in those supports, those services, and how do we address these issues with our individuals, our families, and our community. I also want to make sure to include this. I know I mentioned her at the beginning, but this Dr. Nadine Burke Harris is a phenomenal speaker. She is somebody that has been through trauma, has overcome trauma, has found resiliency, and has found opportunities to help heal from the toxic stress. There's nothing I could say that would be close to the way she so eloquently says it, but I wanted to include this in here for you, so that you have that available, especially for some of you that work with staff, to go through this and be able to then be better equipped and ready to working with the community you work with, whether you work at the individual level, in a group setting, at a community setting, or whatever that may be. This is a really powerful speaker, and if you haven't seen her in person, you can at least see her on YouTube. And she now has a podcast series as well, and there's always great information coming out. Um, it's really powerful, and I would highly recommend that we take a look at it. So I kind of want to regroup before we open it up for some questions. Is we talked a lot about here. Our focus here was on substance use and mental health. I shared with you a number of slides that show what it looks like in our states when it comes to things like depression, trauma, um, suicide ideation, and how we see different communities are struggling at different levels. We also showed you what we're seeing showing up for our young people when it comes to substance use. Some communities are facing bigger issues than others, but then also bringing and highlighting the importance of why we really need to focus in on our young people is really critical to focus in on that early childhood education piece. That's when the brain is continuing. The 90% of it is developed by the age of 5. So if we can intervene, those are excellent time frames to be intervening with bringing these resources at the school level for those early education settings, at daycare levels, Head Start, all of those places to have those agencies become trauma informed, where you see the signs and symptoms that we talked about here and not reactive, oh, that's just a problematic child. We just need to kick that kid out of daycare. Maybe this is our opportunity to say, no, kicking out of daycare because they're throwing tantrums all the time, that's not a solution. Why is that tantrum happening? Or why are we seeing a withdrawal? Or why? We need to change the lens in which we approach things, where we question, why are we seeing some of these behaviors? The behavior doesn't mean that the child does not want to be a part of whatever's going on. There are underlining issues, and finding a way to understand what those are is how you'll find out what are those services and support systems that that child and that family needs. And then understanding for our youth, adolescent time frame is when you see a lot of changes happening, physical, emotional, social. That's all normal. But it's when we start to see deviations where it's more changes, drastic, moving away from connections to the peers as well as family, where we're starting to see some of these outbursts that we didn't see before. Those are things that we need to be paying attention to. And we also need to be acknowledging that we have to have conversations about this topic. That data that I shared here today about what our young people are saying, where 1 in 2 female students in high school are saying they have more bad days than good, that should be our call to action. And even when we grouped both our male and female students, we're at 1 in 3 showing those things, and that's showing up in a way that we know they're wanting to have help, because we've launched a platform. It was just in August, and already we see the biggest group reaching out for resources on behavioral health, mental health, substance use are 13 to 17-year-olds, followed by the young adults, the 18 to 24. So the need in our communities is there. The resources are there. What I hope from today's webinar is you'll take away is how we can look at our community and our groups that we work with, understand the importance of looking at what are some of those signs and symptoms, and we look at it from that different perspective, that they're not just acting out, there's something deeper. And if we don't intervene, we may have some of those negative outcomes coming forward for them. So those adverse childhood experiences not mean you're destined for those negative outcomes. We do know, based on the research, we can intervene, and we have opportunities to bring up those protective factors. We have opportunities to teach and enhance the resiliency skills, which is not a one and done session. You don't do resiliency class 101 one day and say, okay, and it's done. It's an ongoing intentional process. And being able to have the conversations to say, it's okay to talk about this. And if you are feeling a certain way, you must talk with somebody, whether it's somebody from your home, a trusted adult at school, or some, other trusted mentor in your area. But we can't just ignore it. If we continue to ignore it, we're going to see more negative outcomes, and we don't want to see more of that. We want to see our children grow and thrive. We want to see them become their best potential that they have to become. We want to be able to see our communities thrive as well. And in order to do that, we have to take this new lens and understanding of, this is what it means when we talk about mental health. This is what we need to know, that this is what people may be coming to the table with. This is our opportunity to use the data that we find to make informed decisions, so that moving forward, we are not just reacting to something that's happening, but we're being proactive and putting in safety guards. And when we talk about prevention, we have opportunities to prevent a lot of negative outcomes. We just have to make sure that we are understanding what it means to be trauma informed. We need to make sure we understand where resources exist. We need to make sure we know what is available out there for research to improve our workforce, so that we're constantly training those in our field about what ACEs are, what PACEs are, what does it mean to be resilient? What are those skills that looks like? How do we counter the toxic stress in our life? What are some of those skills? And how do we put in some of these opportunities to intervene, whether we're talking about opportunities where we're intervening at the individual level, whether we're talking about opportunities that we're intervening at the family level, whether we're talking about opportunities of intervening at the community level. There are multiple ways, and depending on what your agency works on, you may be actually working in a variety of those different areas. And all to say is, there are things we can do. And we hope we will take this information here today to know that there are resources out there, there are data points out there that help us understand what's happening, and that if we better understand what it means that to have ACEs and what does that look like and what can we do to counter, we can do something about it. And so I do want to open it up to some questions, because I can't see the chat.
I just want to take a moment to jump in, Kathleen, to kind of piggyback off your request for questions. I want to thank Eric for jumping in. I had some technical difficulties this morning, so if you've had a question that perhaps we missed and you feel like we didn't get to it, please retype it in the chat so I can make sure Kathleen sees and addresses that now.
And I'll stop sharing my screen so then that way I can also see the chat here. Now, this is such an important topic, and I just want to thank the Department of Children and Families for allowing us the opportunity to talk about this. As we see, mental health is one of those issues that keeps coming up, and I don't know if it was, COVID did a lot of things at that time that brought out a lot of attentions, but the one great thing is it did help us to really focus in on the importance of this topic. And since then, we have seen so much more attention to it and a lot of conversation. And really, if we are able to increase conversation, just that, we're going to see changes happen. Because you can see just from the data points we shared here, mental health is a concern across our whole state. There are some communities affected more than others, but look at our young people. They're having struggles, and this is our opportunity to tell them it's okay to say something. It's okay to talk about it. Um, Please talk about it, and then we can help them find those resources. And maybe it will also give us an opportunity to work more collaboratively with the various groups, because some of you work more individually. You'll know and hear more of things that need to happen at that community level. And some of you here are more at that community level and need to know more about what's happening at that family level, so you can help to bring in some of these resources. And I think I just saw let me pull up that chat. Somebody asked about the data. So I think I saw the question about, will we have access to the data moving forward? Well, I'm hoping that we will still continue to have some access. There are a couple of data sources that have, one particular, the county health rankings had sent a message some point earlier this year that this was going to be their last year to be grouping all of these indicators the way that they do, because they were part of a project. They are going to be working on trying to find ways to continue that work. However, because we do know what indicators they use, we can still look at those indicators. So while directly from them that might change, still not sure, we still at least know what indicators they use, and those indicators are still going to be available. And so what our group is doing a lot of is compiling all the various different data indicators that relate to behavioral health, the mental health section, the substance use section, so we can continue to gather that information. The more we know of what is happening, then the better we can do about what do we do about it now. We need to know where the issues are. We need to know what types of substances individuals are using. We need to know what are some of those new things that are happening. And if great thing from like the Florida Youth Substance Abuse Survey to be able to know that kids are having these thoughts and these issues, we can now work with the different community partners that engage with students and work with schools and work with families. Okay, I see we've got a few. I'm going to go from the bottom up because so many questions came in. So what about investing in providing therapy in school, just as we provide gym, home economics? So there are some schools that most schools do have a guidance counselor. And depending on the school district, some of them have done other things as well to be able to bring that in. I know in the school district that I'm in, they started to implement Wellness Wednesdays, where every Wednesday they would have some kind of a topic and focus to help promote positive mental health. So that is definitely something that is a great idea, and depending on your school system, whether that's feasible or not. So the families who need parenting classes often don't have resources to pay. Do lists exist for free parenting classes in various counties? So I don't know if there's one main list, but there are various community partners across our state that do offer those free types of parenting classes. I know where I live, we have a group called Inspired to Rise, and they do a lot of community events and host parenting classes. What I can do is I can type into the chat the name of our behavioral health platform, because if there are those types of resources, we've been adding them to that. That platform includes already vetted resources for mental health and substance use, and now we've added in who the local providers are that also have that. So I'll type that in case that is of interest to you, and trying to find where some of those parenting classes may be. Let's see. And it's also in the webinar, so you'll be able to have that as well. All right. Another one here, Kathleen, you're very informative, shared it in a manner that was effective and understandable. Protective factor are most important for me. Is this the same as recovery capital? So in the recovery capital, there are a lot of protective factors mentioned in there, and we can look at protective factors in a variety of different categories and area. when we talk about the research from Hawkins and Catalana, who are the original researchers for communities that care, that looked at risk and protective factors, they identified those into various categories: individual, the self, family, social, community. So they do overlap in some of those things. And if you want to reach out to me, I can share with you what we have for those lists, because I believe there's several of them that come in that the recovered capital. All right. See I'm looking for some of the questions. What about investing and providing? Oh wait, I read that one. This is great information for awareness and groups. Yes, increasing the awareness for parents, for providers, for anybody that's going to be working with young people is really important. Let's see. I think I may have got all the questions. And Robert and Eric, let me know if I missed a question. I think the other ones are thank you comments.
I haven't seen anything come through that you haven't addressed. So with that, I will go ahead and take over and pull up the conclusion. So Kathleen, I want to thank you for taking the time not only to present, but for taking a good bit of time to answer some of the questions that we had in the chat. I know that's really appreciated by a lot of our participants. I know sometimes those practical hands-on questions are what people really like. So really appreciate it. We have included Kathleen's contact information, her email address on this slide. If you have any additional questions that we did not get to, please feel free to reach out to her. Please note a couple of business items before we conclude today's webinar. Here in just a moment, I will post a link to the evaluation in the chat. Additionally, when I end the webinar here in just a moment, your web browser will populate a message that says the host or presenter would like WebEx to open a website on your computer. If you click continue, you will automatically be redirected to the evaluation. You must sign into your FATA account to complete the evaluation. If this is your first webinar with us or you do not have an account on the FATA website, you can register for one at no cost. You may do so by clicking the Haven't Registered Yet button under the Sign In menu. Please use the same email address you used when you registered for today's webinar when you set up your profile in FATA system. This is the only way for us to connect your attendance during today's webinar with your evaluation completion. If you need CEUs to be reported to CE Broker for Florida licensed healthcare practitioners, you must provide an accurate Florida Department of Health license prefix and number the first time you register. If you need to add or update your license number, you may do so by logging in and clicking Edit on the Professional Information section of your profile. You should get a third opportunity to complete the evaluation through a follow-up email later today. As a reminder, the deadline for the evaluation is Tuesday, May 20th, 2025. If you need assistance with logging into your account, registering for an account, or completing the evaluation, you can fill out a contact us form on our website, or you can email us at training@floridabha.org. As a reminder, we do not email statements of credit. Instead, once we verify your attendance and completion of the evaluation, a statement of credit will be posted to the professional development section of your profile in your FATA account within 30 business days. As a reminder, you must have attended the entire webinar and completed the evaluation for a statement of credit. We are not permitted to provide partial credit. As a reminder, the recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FATA website within 30 business days. To access the recording and PowerPoint, visit www.fata.org, navigate to the Resource Center, and click on Training Library as shown on the screen. Thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. Thank you again, Kathleen, for your time and for the presentation. We'd also like to recognize and thank the Florida Department of Children and Families for funding today's education. Have a great day, everyone, and please hold for the event.